October 5th, 1944. Over the Dutch border near Asselt, the sky was pale blue, thin as glass, the kind of morning that carried the smell of frost and war at once. 5 Spitfire Mark 9s of the Royal Canadian Air Force were cutting lazy arcs through sunlight, their Merlin engines humming in synchrony, a sound every Allied pilot knew like his own heartbeat. At altitude, you could almost believe the war was distant. Then the sky changed. A silver streak came out of the east, sharp, silent, and wrong. For a few seconds, none of the pilots understood what they were looking at. It wasn't climbing, it wasn't diving, it wasn't bound by the rhythm of propellers or the drag of pistons. It just cut through the air, clean as a blade through silk. The leader, Squadron Leader John Smith, caught it first on his right, a flash of metal that glinted so bright it made his eyes water. He blinked once, twice, thinking it must be sunlight reflecting off a falling bomb or the canopy of another Spitfire. Then it moved again. Impossibly fast, a dart of light that left only a whisper of exhaust haze behind. Christ, he muttered, tightening his grip on the stick. The others hadn't seen it yet. The silver machine banked sharply, rolling into a shallow dive over the border fields, its silhouette alien against the morning clouds. Swept wings, no propeller, the nose blunt like a shark. For men who had spent years fighting Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, this thing looked like it didn't belong to their century. It hissed more than it roared. The sound stretched and metallic, something between wind and thunder. Smith keyed his radio. "Keep your eyes open. Something just blew past me at 7 o'clock. No propeller, repeat, no propeller." For a heartbeat, only static. Then Flight Lieutenant Davenport's voice, half disbelieving. "Say again, lead." "No propeller," Smith snapped. "Looks like a comet with wings." The Spitfires turned, sunlight flashing off their wings as they tried to form on their leader. But the intruder was gone. A glint far ahead, already a mile away and moving faster than anything Smith had ever seen. The air seemed to tremble in its wake. He pushed the throttle forward, the Merlin engine howling in protest as the Spitfire climbed past safe manifold pressure. The altimeter ticked up. Airspeed 380, 400, 420 miles per hour. The silver speck ahead was still growing smaller. He realized with a sick twist in his stomach that he was chasing something that didn't care about the same physics he did. "Keep your eyes sharp," he said, quieter now. "You're watching history." Below them, the Dutch countryside flickered. Broken roads, flooded fields, and the skeletal remains of farmhouses shattered by months of bombing. The air was cold, biting through leather gloves. The squadron spread out, straining for a glimpse. For a moment it reappeared. A shallow dive through thin clouds, twin tails of smoke behind it like white scratches across the sky. Then it was gone again. On the ground near Asselt, British artillery crews heard it too. A whine, too high to be a piston engine, too fast to be a V1. They looked up in confusion as the silver dart streaked across the horizon, sunlight glinting off its fuselage before it vanished westward. In the air, Smith exhaled hard. "That wasn't a rocket," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "That was manned." For the next hour, Allied radios across Belgium and Holland buzzed with conflicting reports. Some claimed it was a secret V3. Others swore it was a captured American prototype. A few, the older hands who'd flown since the Battle of Britain, stayed silent. They'd seen enough strange things in war to know when something truly new had arrived. By noon, word reached intelligence posts in Brussels and London. Photos started circulating. The German Luftwaffe had deployed a new weapon, the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. The name alone felt unreal, like science fiction read aloud in a war zone. In a cramped airfield hut outside Eindhoven, mechanics listened as pilots described what they'd seen. One of them, An older corporal with oil-blackened hands looked at the crude sketch on the table. Swept wings, twin nacelles, no propeller, and shook his head. "No piston can make that speed," he murmured. "That's not an airplane. That's something else." The younger men laughed nervously, but no one disagreed. That night, back at base, Smith sat on the wing of his Spitfire, cigarette trembling between his fingers. The sunset burned orange behind the hangars, painting everything in long shadows. He replayed the moment in his head. That blur of silver, the sound that wasn't sound at all, just pressure and vibration. He had seen every enemy the Luftwaffe could throw at him. FW-19s, ME-19s, Dornier, Junkers. But this thing didn't fight the same war. It didn't even belong in it. He stubbed the cigarette out against the metal skin of the wing. "They've built the future," he said quietly, "and it just flew past me." In London, Air Ministry analysts pored over intercepted German radio chatter. Code words like Schwalbe and Sturmvogel began to appear. Swallow and Stormbird. There were reports of new runways being built with thicker concrete, longer takeoff zones, and fuel compounds no Allied chemist recognized. Some officers dismissed it as desperation. Others felt the ground shifting beneath them. At High Wycombe, a young American visiting officer, Chuck Yeager, overheard the discussion and leaned closer to the wall map covered in red pins. He didn't say anything, just watched as a colonel underlined the word jet propulsion in red pencil. But back over the continent, none of that mattered to Smith and his men. They weren't looking at reports or diagrams. They had seen it with their own eyes. They knew what it meant. When dawn came the next morning, the airfield was still. The Spitfires stood silent, dew frozen on their wings. Mechanics moved slowly, their breath steaming in the cold air. Smith walked across the tarmac, hands in pockets, head tilted toward the horizon as if expecting the silver shape to return. Somewhere deep inside, a realization had begun to form. The same one pilots across the front would soon share. That for the first time in history, they might be flying in the past while their enemy flew in the future. The silence of that morning was heavier than flak. October's air grew thinner as the afternoon waned. The 5 Spitfires turned back toward their base in Belgium, fuel nearly gone, their engines whining through the last drops of 150-grade fuel. But none of them spoke. The radios stayed quiet except for the static hiss of distance. Every man in the formation knew what he had seen, but couldn't yet admit it aloud. War had rules: speed, climb, turn, fire, and this thing had broken them all in seconds. Back on the ground at Eindhoven, the landing pattern was routine until Smith's wheels kissed the runway. The ground crew waved them in, expecting bullet holes, maybe a stray cannon hit. Instead, they saw pilots stepping down with blank faces, eyes unfocused, the way men look after seeing something they can't name. Smith walked straight to the operations hut. The air smelled of stale coffee and gasoline. A clerk glanced up as he entered, half smiling. "Good flight, sir?" He didn't answer. He took a pencil from the desk and sketched what he'd seen. The nose, the intake, the swept wings. He paused at the engines, 2 cylinders slung under each wing like pods. He circled them twice. "No propellers?" he muttered. The clerk frowned. "Then what drives it?" Smith didn't look up. "Hell if I know." That night, as maintenance crews serviced the Spitfires under yellow floodlights, rumors spread through the airfield like frost creeping across a window. Some said the Germans had invented a new rocket plane. Others insisted it was a trick of light, a captured American test ship painted silver to confuse radar. A mechanic who'd fought at Dunkirk swore he'd seen one 2 days earlier near Nijmegen, streaking so fast his anti-aircraft gun couldn't track it. Each story changed as it passed from hangar to hangar, but one word stayed the same: jet. Far across the channel, inside a dimly lit intelligence room in London, officers pinned aerial photographs to corkboards. Grainy images from reconnaissance flights showed long concrete runways at Lechfeld and Neuburg, too long for standard fighters. Next to them, engineers had scribbled notes. No prop arc visible. Heat distortion at exhaust. Speed estimate 500 miles per hour. They didn't yet know the machine's name, but they knew what it meant. The Germans had crossed into a new age. Smith lay awake in the barracks, the hum of generators outside blending with the faint rumble of distant artillery. He could still feel the vibration of the encounter, the pressure wave that had hit his cockpit when the silver shape passed. He'd chased plenty of myths in this war. Invincible aces, miracle bombs, ghost squadrons. But this time, it wasn't rumor. It had sound, shape, and speed. He thought of the thousands of young pilots training across England, men barely old enough to shave, soon to climb into machines that suddenly felt ancient. He thought of the engineers working in factories back home, hammering out propellers while somewhere in Germany a turbine screamed to life. For the first time since 1940, John Smith felt truly old. Dawn arrived gray and damp. Fog clung to the grass. He found his wingman, Davenport, sitting on an oil drum smoking a cigarette. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Davenport exhaled and said quietly, "If they've got 100 of those, we're finished." Smith didn't argue. "Maybe," he said, "but we've still got eyes. We saw it take off. Means it needs a runway. Means it's heavy. And if it's heavy..." He flicked ash into the mud. "It can be caught." The two men watched the horizon brighten, a dull smear of orange over Holland. In the distance, the sound of engines rose again, familiar, rhythmic, reassuring. Spitfires climbing into the morning patrol. For now, the world still made sense. But somewhere, beyond the clouds and smoke, engineers in Augsburg were writing a different future. Turbines were spinning on test stands, their whine rising above the drone of old engines. The war's sound was changing pitch. Back in Belgium, the mess hall buzzed with chatter that afternoon. A courier arrived from Group Command carrying a folded document marked "Secret." Smith read it silently, his jaw tightening with each line. The paper confirmed it. Enemy aircraft designated Me 262, jet propulsion type. Extreme caution advised. Avoid engagement during climb or dive. Attack during takeoff or landing only. He placed the paper on the table and looked at the younger pilots gathered around. "So it's real," one whispered. "It's real," Smith said, voice low. "And it flies like the devil's own hand." Outside, the wind picked up. Canvas flapped against hangar walls. Somewhere a generator coughed and died. The war was entering its next phase, and none of them knew whether human reflexes would still matter in it. That evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, Smith walked back to his aircraft. He ran a hand along the fuselage, feeling the cold metal under his palm. The Spitfire had carried him through years of chaos, France, Dunkirk, Dieppe, Normandy, and always brought him home. But now it felt fragile, like an artifact from another era. He imagined the silver jet gliding above him, smooth and effortless, and wondered how long piston engines could still fight against turbines. The air smelled of kerosene and wet earth. Overhead, the first stars appeared. In that stillness, he realized he had witnessed something greater than fear. It was inevitability. The future had stepped onto the battlefield, indifferent to who won or lost. England, 3 days later. The weather over East Anglia was the color of lead. Low clouds dragging over the hangars, rain tapping against corrugated roofs. Inside the intelligence briefing hut, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and unease. Pinned to the wall were blurred reconnaissance photos taken by mosquito recon flights. Runways cut deep into German countryside, strange aircraft shapes with twin nacelles under their wings, and exhaust scars blackening the concrete behind them. A projector hummed as officers gathered, caps tucked under their arms. The film flickered across the screen. ghostly black and white images of the same silver dart the Canadian squadron had reported. The officers spoke quietly, their voices low, the kind of tone men use when they already know the truth but are afraid to say it. At the back of the room sat a young American pilot on exchange duty, Captain Charles Chuck Yeager. 21 years old, cocky grin usually glued to his face, but not today. He leaned forward in his chair, elbows on knees, watching as the film slowed. The still frame froze on the silver shape. Someone drew a circle around the tailpipes with a grease pencil. No propeller, no exhaust stacks, just two black mouths spitting heat. A British engineer cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, the Germans call it the Me 262. Jet propulsion twin Junkers Jumo engines. Estimated top speed, 540 miles per hour." The room went silent except for the projector clicking behind them. 540. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Every man in that room had flown machines that bled oil at 400. 540 meant uncatchable. Another officer, older, skeptical, tapped his pen against the table. Even if it's true, they can't have many. The metallurgy alone, turbine blades, heat tolerance, it's impossible to mass produce. A younger analyst responded quietly, "Sir, they said the same thing about the V2. Laughter tried to rise, failed. Someone lit another cigarette. The match flared orange, reflected in Yeager's eyes. He didn't laugh either. He'd seen what German desperation could build. He'd flown through flak over France that looked like fireworks made by engineers who had run out of mercy. The colonel switched off the projector. The room returned to gray daylight filtering through the rain-streaked windows. Papers rustled, chairs scraped. He spoke evenly. "Until we know more, assume the Me 262 can outrun every aircraft we have. Your only advantage is when it's on the ground or in takeoff. Keep altitude above its bases. Wait for it to slow." Outside, engines coughed to life. The sound of piston fury filled the airfield again, comforting in its predictability. But for the first time, it sounded old. Yeager walked out into the drizzle, tugging his jacket tighter. He watched a P-51 taxi past, propeller whipping rain into mist. The Mustang looked beautiful, lethal even. But suddenly, it didn't feel invincible. He ran his hand along its wing as it rolled by, the vibration of the engine rattling through his fingertips. For a moment, he imagined a machine without that rhythmic pulse, just the smooth, endless hiss of turbine thrust. He didn't like the image. It felt soulless, mechanical in a way that scared even him. Back inside the barracks, pilots sat around a pot-bellied stove, the day's briefing echoing in their heads. Some joked to hide the tension. "If Jerry's got rockets now, we'll just have to steal one," someone said. Another replied, "Sure, right after I borrow his V2 for the ride home." Laughter again, forced. Beneath it was a silence that weighed heavier than the rain. That night, the wind howled across the base. In the officers' quarters, Yeager couldn't sleep. He stared at the map pinned above his bunk. Red dots marking known enemy airfields. Lechfeld, Rechlin, Neuburg, Akmer. Each now suspected to host the new jet. He thought about how wars always changed when technology outpaced courage. Cavalry had died when tanks came. Battleships when aircraft arrived. Maybe this was the moment when dogfighting itself would die. He lit a cigarette and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. Outside, thunder rolled across the coast. Somewhere out there, on the other side of that weather, German engineers were testing their future. The next morning, Yeager joined a group of senior pilots at breakfast. The mess hall smelled of bacon grease and damp wool. Newspapers lay open on the tables. Headlines about Allied advances, rumors of Hitler's new miracle weapons. Someone muttered, "They call it the Wunderwaffe." The word sounded ridiculous and frightening all at once. A British pilot, pale from too many missions, looked up. Every war, they promise a miracle. Maybe this one just works. No one replied. Later that day, intelligence officers distributed the first recognition sheets. Black silhouettes of the Me 262 printed on coarse paper. Plan view, side profile, notes in the margins. Twin-engine jet aircraft. Avoid pursuit in level flight. Vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Pilots studied them in silence, committing the shape to memory. One young sergeant traced the outline with his thumb. "Looks like something out of Buck Rogers," he whispered. Yeager glanced at him. "Buck Rogers doesn't shoot you down at 500 miles an hour." Days turned to weeks. Sightings multiplied. Recon units reported flashes of silver diving through bomber formations, too fast to engage, too fast even for cameras to track. B-17 crews called them silver ghosts. Some claimed they fired cannons that sounded like thunder. Others said they were untouchable, appearing out of nowhere, killing one, and vanishing. By mid-October, the Allied High Command finally accepted the truth. The Germans had deployed jet fighters in operational numbers. Panic didn't set in, but something worse did. Quiet dread. Every mission briefing began with the same sentence. "If you see one, don't chase it." In pubs near the bases, airmen debated over pints. Some swore the jet would change nothing, that sheer numbers would crush it. Others drank in silence, staring at the floor. The idea of an enemy that could choose when to fight and when to vanish cut deeper than fear. It felt like humiliation. Meanwhile, engineers back in America and Britain scrambled for answers. Laboratories in Wright Field and Farnborough buzzed with activity, studying captured German turbine fragments, trying to reverse engineer what the enemy had mastered. But science needed time, and war wasn't giving any. By November, the sky over Europe had become two worlds, one ruled by propellers, the other by exhaust fire, and the line between them grew thinner every day. At night, Yeager sometimes stood alone on the runway, watching stars blink through the cloud gaps. He wondered how it would feel to face a jet in combat, to aim his guns at something moving faster than the bullets themselves. He could almost hear the hiss again, the same eerie note Smith had described in his report, a sound not of war, but of evolution. If they built 100 of those, he thought, we lose the sky. He didn't write it down. He didn't have to. Every pilot already knew. October 7th, 1944. The morning broke in streaks of cold light over northern Germany, the kind of autumn dawn that turned hangar roofs into sheets of silver frost. At Akmer Airfield, a pair of Messerschmitt Me 262s sat at the far end of the runway, engines whining like captive thunder. Mechanics in grease-dark uniforms hurried around them, faces drawn, nerves raw from sleepless nights. Fuel trucks hissed, wrenches clattered. Each jet looked less like an aircraft than a weapon waiting to be unchained. 70 miles west, a P-51 Mustang with the name Detroit Miss painted in cursive red script beneath the canopy-carved contrails across the cloud ceiling. Captain Urban Ben Drew flexed his gloved hand on the throttle, eyes scanning the broken sky ahead. Below him lay the maze of fields, rivers, and smoke columns that marked the German heartland. He'd flown dozens of escort missions, guarded bombers, fought dogfights that blurred into instinct. But today, something different pulled at the horizon. The radio crackled. "Lead, this is 2. Visibility improving, ceiling 1200. You still want to push toward Akmer?" Drew's voice came steady. "Affirmative." "Let's see if the rumors breathe air." He nudged the stick, and Detroit Miss tilted slightly into the wind. The morning sun flashed off her polished aluminum skin. Beneath that gleam was a worn machine that had carried Drew through months of survival. Patched bullet holes sealed with dull rivets, exhaust stains streaked down her flanks like battle scars. At 0943 hours, they sighted the airfield. A gray strip carved through pines, half hidden by haze. Drew throttled back, dropped to treetop height. The world rushed past at 300 miles per hour. Barns, roads, scattered anti-aircraft posts that looked almost abandoned. Then movement. Two silver shapes at the far end of the runway, engines spooling, heat shimmer rippling behind them. "Two birds rolling," shouted his wingman. Drew's pulse spiked. The rumors weren't rumors anymore. He could see them. Sleek, shark-nosed machines accelerating down the strip, the air behind them bending with power. He'd never seen that kind of speed on takeoff. No propeller blur, just the pure burn of thrust. "All right," he muttered. "Let's dance." He shoved the throttle forward, felt Detroit Miss surge ahead. The Merlin engine screamed in protest, manifold pressure climbing into the red. The air vibrated through the cockpit. Noise, wind, adrenaline fused into one sensation. He lined up on the lead jet, still half grounded, its landing gear barely lifting. The distance closed fast. Tracer fire erupted. Bright orange streaks zipped across the runway. Drew's guns hammered, the Mustang shuddering from recoil. Rounds slammed into the jet's right engine. Black smoke exploded outward. Flames trailed along the fuselage as the Me-262 lurched sideways, one wing clipping the ground. It cartwheeled once, then burst apart in a blossom of orange fire. "Good God!" his wingman yelled. The second Me-262 kept rolling, pilot fighting to stay on course, engines screaming. Drew yanked his Mustang into a tight, climbing turn, came around for another pass. The flak started now. Dark blossoms tearing open the sky. Shrapnel rattled against the wings like hail. He dropped back down through smoke, sighted the second jet just clearing the end of the runway. It was airborne, wheels half retracted, vulnerable for the span of a heartbeat. He squeezed the trigger again. The .50 caliber guns spat fire. Bullets ripped through the right engine nacelle. A flash, then a streak of flame licking down the side. The jet staggered, rolled, nose dipped. It hit the trees beyond the field and vanished in a thunderclap of flame. Drew pulled hard, banking away from the blast. The G-force crushed him into the seat. Sweat stung his eyes. He could smell burned oil, cordite, and something else. Victory mixed with disbelief. "Both down?" he gasped into the mic. "Repeat, both jets down." Static. His wingman's voice came back, hoarse. "No way, Ben. No way in hell." But the smoke told the story. Two columns rising from the forest, black against the pale October sky. Drew leveled out at 1,000 feet, circling once. Down below, the airfield erupted in chaos. Figures running, trucks scattering, flak batteries swinging skyward. He saw tracer lines chasing him and banked east, engine roaring as he dove for cover in the low clouds. Inside the cockpit, everything slowed. The noise dulled. His breathing steadied. For a long moment, he flew through mist so thick it looked like smoke from the wreck itself. He'd done something no one had done before. Shot down not one, but two of the world's first jets. And yet the cockpit felt cold, almost lonely. There was no cheer, no triumph. Just silence and the ache of knowing nobody would believe it. By the time he reached Allied lines, fuel was near zero. The Mustang kissed the runway at full throttle, bouncing once before settling. Ground crew rushed up, expecting damage. He climbed down, eyes bloodshot, face streaked with sweat and exhaust grime. "What the hell happened out there?" a mechanic asked. Drew just stared past him, toward the western horizon where two pillars of smoke still smudged the sky. "History," he said softly, "and no film to prove it." Inside the debriefing tent, the skepticism came fast. No gun camera footage. The camera jammed at takeoff. No witnesses close enough to confirm. The intelligence officer scribbled notes, expression unreadable. "So you claim two jet aircraft destroyed on the ground?" "Not on the ground," Drew corrected. "One airborne. Both destroyed." The officer exhaled. "We'll file it as unconfirmed. He nodded, too tired to argue. Outside, the air smelled of rain again. The world went on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet far to the east, in the smoking ruins of Aachen, German officers stood over twisted wreckage that once represented the Reich's final hope. News traveled slow, and when it finally reached Allied command, it came wrapped in disbelief. Some dismissed it outright. Others quietly acknowledged that if a Mustang could catch a jet on takeoff, maybe the future still had blind spots. That night, Drew sat alone beside his Mustang. The metal skin still radiated warmth from flight. He ran a hand over the painted name, Detroit Miss, thinking of home, of the city whose factories had built the engines that now ruled the skies. He thought of the German pilots, too, men his own age, maybe younger, who'd climbed into machines meant to rewrite the laws of war and instead had burned before reaching the clouds. The air cooled. Somewhere nearby, a generator coughed out, leaving the field wrapped in moonlight and distant thunder. Drew leaned back against the wheel strut, eyes closed. The smell of burned jet fuel lingered faintly on the wind. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a witness. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread again. This time about an American who had downed 2 jets in one sortie. Some called it impossible, others pure luck. The official reports remained cautious. Yet among pilots, the story carried weight. In every ready room from East Anglia to France, they whispered his call sign with a mix of awe and envy. Detroit Miss, they'd say, shaking their heads. She caught the future sleeping. Drew never spoke much about that day. He flew more missions, earned his victories, survived the war. But every time he heard the high-pitched whine of a turbine in the years to come, on an airfield, a test bench, or later a civilian jetliner, he would pause, remember the flash of silver on that German runway, and feel again that strange mix of terror and grace that only comes when man meets his own invention and outlives it. November 6th, 1944. The sky over western Germany was bruised purple, streaked with vapor trails and thin sheets of flak smoke. In the cold, high air above the Rhine, hundreds of contrails carved white scars across the morning. Below, the last of Hitler's Reich burned. Rail lines, fuel depots, and bridges lay in ruin. Yet the Luftwaffe refused to die quietly. Captain Charles Chuck Yeager of the 357 Fighter Group flew lead position in his Mustang, glamorous Glen 3, her polished nose glinting gold in the thin sunlight. He'd been in the air since dawn, escorting a formation of B-17s punching their way toward Merseburg. The bombers lumbered on, massive and slow, their vapor trails shimmering like ghosts. At 24,000 feet, Yeager's radio came alive with the flat crackle of panic. "Bandit, jet, 10 o'clock high." His eyes snapped left. There, cutting across the bomber stream like a silver needle. A Messerschmitt Me 262, sunlight flashing along its fuselage, slicing through the formation at a speed no piston engine could dream of. In seconds, a B-17 blew apart, wings shearing away. Flames tumbled through the formation like paper on fire. Yeager's hands moved before his mind caught up. Throttle forward, stick hard right, drop tanks jettisoned. The Mustang lurched, the G-force pressing him deep into the seat. "I've got him," he barked into the mic. The Me 262 streaked through the chaos, diving hard. Its cannons flashed again, bright yellow bursts, before it pulled away, smoke curling from its wingtips. Yeager rolled inverted, followed the dive. The altimeter spun. 20,000 feet, 18,000, 15,000. The air screamed past the canopy, the Merlin engine howling in protest. His speed climbed past 500 miles per hour, every bolt in the plane vibrating like it might tear loose. The jet was a silver blur ahead, wings gleaming, twin exhausts blazing. Yeager knew he couldn't outfly it, but he could outthink it. He watched carefully. The German pilot wasn't climbing away. He was descending fast toward a patch of farmland near Steinhuder Meer, the same area where intelligence believed the Luftwaffe kept one of its jet bases. If the pilot was returning to land, that meant one thing: low fuel. The Me-262 drank kerosene like whiskey. It could run hard, but not for long. Yeager grinned, jaw tight. "You're out of gas, pal." He stayed high, trailing from behind, watching the jet sink lower. The German leveled at 1,000 feet, landing gear starting to extend. Yeager dove again, closing fast. At that altitude, the Mustang's edge returned. Gravity and guts. The radio hissed in his ears. "Yeager, break off. You're too low." He ignored it. The ground blurred beneath him. Trees, barns, flashes of water. His gun sight glowed red as he lined up the target. The Me-262's flaps dropped. The pilot committed. Yeager squeezed the trigger. A split second of thunder. 6 Brownings blazing. Tracers ripped across the field, walking straight into the jet's tail. Sparks, smoke, flame. The right wing folded backward like paper. The jet pitched nose first, hit the ground short of the runway, and exploded in a sheet of orange fire that rolled across the dirt. Yeager pulled hard to climb, G-force clawing at his vision. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from the base. White bursts exploding around him, dirt and debris thrown skyward. He skimmed the treetops, the Mustang's wingtips almost grazing branches as he punched east, the smell of cordite thick in his cockpit. His breathing slowed. The radio crackled again, voices half shouting, half laughing. "Jesus, Chuck, you got him." He didn't answer. His voice was calm, steady, almost casual when it finally came. "First time I saw a jet," he said, "I shot it down. Not very sportsmanlike. But what the hell he leveled off, the adrenaline ebbing. The sky was empty again. Just the slow, rhythmic hum of the Merlin engine, that old familiar heartbeat of the war he understood. Back at Leiston Airfield that afternoon, Yeager taxied to a stop, canopy sliding open with a hiss. Ground crew ran forward, grinning, shouting questions. He climbed out slowly, legs weak, face calm. He didn't say much, just pulled off his gloves and looked eastward, where the sky still shimmered faintly from the morning's battle. He filed the report as routine. "Enemy aircraft destroyed, vicinity of Bremen." Nothing in the form captured what it felt like, that flash of metal, that brief confrontation between eras. Later that night in the squadron hut, the men gathered around him, eager for details. "How'd it fly, Chuck?" "Was it really that fast?" He shrugged. "Faster than anything we've got. But it still has to land somewhere." They laughed, half out of pride, half out of relief. Someone poured coffee. Someone else uncorked whiskey. The mood loosened, but Yeager sat quietly for a long time, staring at the map pinned to the wall, red pins marking Me-262 bases across Germany. He knew this wasn't over. He knew the jets would come again, faster, better armed, flown by men desperate enough to trade their lives for seconds of glory. Still, something inside him stayed steady. The Mustang might be old compared to the future, but the future still had to fight gravity. By December, Yeager's name passed quietly through the Allied command. The man who proved jets could die. The propaganda papers didn't say it, but among the pilots, it meant everything. If one man could bring down the future, maybe the war wasn't lost to machines after all. Over the next weeks, Allied air groups began to adapt. They learned the rhythm of the Me-262, its weakness on takeoff, its heavy frame during landing, its thirst for fuel. The Luftwaffe called their wonder weapon unstoppable. Yeager had already shown it could bleed. He didn't think of himself as a symbol. To him, it was simple. A target appeared. He took the shot. And yet, In that single burst of gunfire outside Bremen, something irreversible had happened. The first real crack in the myth of the invincible jet. At dawn the next morning, Yeager returned to the flight line. Fog rolled across the grass, the kind that muffled footsteps and turned engines into ghosts. Mechanics worked quietly around the Mustangs, tightening bolts, checking oil. He placed a hand on the nose of glamorous Glenn III, feeling the cool metal under his palm. The world was changing fast. Turbines replacing pistons, technology replacing instinct. But the plane beneath his hand was still his partner, his friend. He looked up at the brightening sky, pale blue and endless. "Not yet," he whispered. "The future's not faster than me yet." By early 1945, the skies over Europe no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. They belonged to exhaustion, to smoke, to flame, to the endless gray of a war running out of breath. Yet across the ruined airfields of Germany, among the craters and skeletal hangars, the last of the Messerschmitt Me 262s still waited. Sleek, beautiful, deadly, the Wunderwaffe, Hitler's miracle weapon. The promise that one final stroke of technology could erase defeat. They came too late. In February, Allied reconnaissance began finding wrecked jets scattered across autobahns and forest clearings, machines hidden under camouflage nets, half buried in snow, guarded by boys in uniforms too big for them. Once, these aircraft had been the pride of Göring's Air Force. Now they were relics of desperation. At Lechfeld, mechanics without fuel rolled them into barns to save them from strafing runs. At Newburgh, pilots slept inside their cockpits because there was no shelter left. Each takeoff meant gambling with death. Flak from above, Allied fighters from every side, and engines that might explode before reaching altitude. The Allies had learned the rhythm of the jet. They knew its habits, its hunger, its fragility. P-51s and Tempests began circling German airfields at dawn, waiting like hawks above the mist. They didn't chase the jets anymore. They hunted patience. When the Me 262s came in low, flaps out, gear down, their speed dropped to something human again. That's when the Mustang struck. In one brutal week in March, 15 jets were destroyed on approach to their runways. The pilots never had a chance. Some never even saw the enemy. They died staring at the ground that should have meant safety. From the ground, villagers saw the battles like streaks of light. Brief flashes over forests, then black columns rising into the sky. Children pointed and whispered, not knowing they were watching the last act of an empire's dream. Inside Germany, even the men who had built the jets began to lose faith. Engineers who had once stood proud beside Hitler now stood in silence as factories burned. Fuel supplies vanished. Replacement parts were scavenged from wrecks. The brilliant Junkers Umo engines that once promised to change the world now tore themselves apart after only 20 hours of flight. The machine built to outrun everything could barely outlast a week. General Adolf Galland, the famous ace and commander of the elite JV-44, still believed the Me 262 could make a difference. His pilots, veterans and teenagers alike, flew from secret strips hidden in forests, their tails painted red with white stripes to warn German flak gunners not to shoot them down by mistake. They called themselves the Squadron of Experts. Every takeoff was a salute to futility. Galland knew it too. Each mission was a prayer without faith. The jets were fast, but the war was faster. Every day, more bases fell, more refineries vanished under the carpet of Allied bombs. Without fuel, speed meant nothing. On April mornings, the sound of jet engines no longer inspired awe. It sounded like denial. The once miraculous hiss that had terrified Allied pilots now echoed hollow over the ruins of cities, over the blackened spires of Cologne and the skeletal factories of the Ruhr. In one final mission, Galland led his men against a formation of American bombers near Munich. They climbed through thin cloud, sunlight glinting on the canopies, the air vibrating with the strange, high-pitched wail of the turbines. For a brief few minutes, they were gods again, their speed untouchable, their guns thundering. B-17S exploded in midair, debris scattering like sparks. Then, as they turned for home, a swarm of P-51s fell from the sun. The ambush was surgical. One by one, the jets went down. Not for lack of courage, but for lack of fuel, altitude, and hope. Gallen's own aircraft limped home, engine coughing, canopy cracked. He landed on fumes, the runway littered with burning wreckage. He climbed out, looked at the horizon, and knew the truth. The age of the Luftwaffe was over. By the time April faded, the Wunderwaffe had become nothing more than wreckage scattered across Europe, abandoned on roadsides, burned on runways, hidden in barns, buried under leaves. Allied troops found them everywhere, their swept wings still gleaming under dust. Some soldiers posed beside them for photographs, smiling, unaware they were touching the first bones of the modern world. In London, intelligence officers studied the captured jets with fascination. They admired the engineering, the elegance of design, the way the future had been built inside the wreckage of tyranny. But they also saw its flaw: brilliance without endurance, innovation without time. For every jet the Germans built, they lost 100 men. For every miracle weapon they imagined, they forgot the simplest truth of war: that machines don't fight, men do. In the months that followed, American engineers shipped the Me-262s back to the States for testing. Pilots at Wright Field flew them carefully, learning from their secrets. Jet engines would become the next frontier. But the men who first saw them, Smith, Drew, Yeager, and thousands of nameless airmen, carried the memory differently. For them, the jet wasn't just a machine. It was a glimpse of something both terrifying and inevitable. The moment humanity looked forward and saw itself outrun. On the last clear morning of the European War, the skies over Germany were empty. No jets, no propellers, no smoke. Just silence. The war had ended, and the machines of tomorrow sat motionless in the fields of yesterday. Somewhere near Eindhoven, John Smith, older now, weary, walked once more along the same runway where he'd first seen that flash of silver 6 months before. The grass had grown back through the cracks. He stopped, listening to the wind. It was just wind now, nothing more. He smiled faintly. "They built the future too soon," he whispered. Behind him, a Spitfire sat in a museum hangar, polished and perfect. In another part of the world, jets screamed across the sky, the direct descendants of the machines that once terrified him. History had folded back on itself, and what had been unthinkable in 1944 had become ordinary by 1954. But in that brief space between fear and progress, in the soundless blur over Asselt, in the fire over Akmer, in Yeager's calm burst of defiance over Bremen, the world had changed. The Me-262 had proven that the future could arrive before humanity was ready for it. And somewhere in the pale dawn of victory, beneath the cold skies of Europe, the wrecks of those jets still gleamed faintly in the light. A reminder that genius, when born in desperation, burns bright, but never for long. But